Welcome to this explainer. You know how massive restaurant chains are always making these big, public promises about ethical sourcing? Like, we care about animal welfare. Well, how do we, and more importantly, how do investors and regulators actually know if they're keeping those promises? Today, we're going to look right under the hood at the exact mathematical metrics used to hold these giant corporations accountable.
Okay, let's start with the big picture. The SASB standards. Specifically, we're looking at the framework built for the restaurant industry. Now, as of 2022, these standards are managed by the International Sustainability Standards Board, under the IFRS Foundation. And I know that's a lot of acronyms, but it's absolutely crucial, because it means these aren't just made-up guidelines. This is the official, globally recognized sustainability framework that major food and beverage corporations use to report their data, right alongside their financial results. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly touch on the SASB restaurant standard and supply chain risks. And then we are going to dive deep into exactly how you track cage-free eggs, gestation crate-free pork, and look at some broader animal welfare strategies. Let's jump in. Starting off with Section 1, the SASB restaurant standard and setting our baseline. Look, before we can actually measure compassion, we have to face the operational reality of the restaurant business. The global food supply chain is a logistical beast. It's incredibly complex. While restaurants are usually pretty good at meticulously tracking the energy and water they use inside their own buildings, we're intentionally skipping those general operational metrics today. Instead, we want to laser focus entirely on how supply chains quantify animal welfare. Standardizing and auditing a global network of food suppliers is a totally unique challenge, especially if you're dealing with a franchise model. A brand's reputation completely rests on ingredient quality, but making sure those standards are consistent across continents, that's a massive undertaking. Which brings us to Section 2, supply chain sourcing risks, and how ethical sourcing creates actual value. You see, this isn't just about good public relations anymore. Ethical sourcing translates directly into long-term financial viability. This quote, straight from the SASB framework, really hits the nail on the head as to why investors care so deeply about this. The demand from the restaurant industry physically shapes agricultural production all over the world. If a brand drops the ball on monitoring its supply chain, they're risking severe supply disruptions and an absolute nightmare of negative publicity. Sustainable sourcing, including strict animal welfare standards, minimizes those risks, maintains food safety, and ultimately protects the brand's bottom line. So, how do we move from broad, feel-good marketing strategies to concrete, verifiable numbers? Well, in the SASB standard, it all comes down to metric FBRN 430A.2. This specific accounting rule demands total transparency on two highly specific items, eggs and pork. Let's break down exactly how you can track this data yourself, whether you're an informed consumer or an investor. Moving to Section 3, tracking cage-free eggs and the freedom to roam. First things first, we have to define what cage-free actually means according to the rulebook, so there's literally zero ambiguity. A cage-free environment is explicitly defined as a space that allows hens unrestricted access to food and water. And importantly, it provides them the freedom to actually roam within that space during the laying cycle. The standard also officially notes that eggs originating from a free-range setup are totally included within this cage-free definition. And this right here is where sustainability reporting gets super interesting, the actual math of measurement. If you're looking at a restaurant's sustainability report, you need to know their exact formulas. For eggs, it's pretty straightforward. We track them strictly by the quantity purchased. You literally just take the total number of eggs purchased from a cage-free environment and divide that by the total number of all eggs purchased. It's a simple percentage by number. But when we look at pork, the industry requires a completely different mathematical approach. And that takes us into Section 4, tracking gestation crate-free pork. Just like with the eggs, the SASB framework leaves absolutely no room for creative interpretation here. It officially defines a gestation crate as an enclosure for housing an individual breeding sow that is restrictive enough to prevent dynamic movements. We're talking specifically about preventing the animal from even turning around. The standard explicitly points out that these enclosures are typically non-bedded, featuring concrete floors and metal stalls. It's a stark reality, and it's exactly what this metric is trying to phase out. So, unlike eggs, which you just count individually,
Pork welfare is measured by weight. A restaurant operator has to take the total weight of pork they purchased that was produced without using a gestation crate and divide that by the total weight of all the pork they purchased. Now, the standard gives a really specific technical rule here. This weight has to be calculated using either the carcass weight or, if they're buying pre-processed products, the retail weight. This is absolutely vital because it ensures we get an apples-to-apples comparison across different restaurant chains, regardless of whether they're buying whole cuts of meat or pre-processed ingredients. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, broader animal welfare strategies, and looking at the complete picture.
There's a companion metric, FB-ARN 430A3, where restaurants are required to discuss their big picture strategic approach to animal welfare. So beyond just tracking the exact math for cage-free eggs and crate-free pork, operators have to discuss their policies across 4 critical stages of the animal's life. They have to publicly address their standards for animal treatment and handling, the conditions during housing and transportation, the actual procedures and facilities used for slaughter, and finally, what their policies are regarding the use of antibiotics and hormones. And to prove these policies actually have some teeth, organizations have to detail their use of recognized third-party certifications. The standard specifically looks for heavy hitters like Animal Welfare Approved, the Certified Humane Program, or the Global Animal Partnership, also known as GAP 5-step program. Oh, and moving beyond those overall certifications, there's one more highly specific data point they can report. The percentage of animal protein, again, strictly calculated by carcass weight, that was produced entirely without the use of medically important antibiotics at any stage of the animal's life. By forcing companies to use this standardized math, literally dividing the number of cage-free eggs by total eggs or tracking pork by specific carcass weight, the SASB framework completely eliminates vague marketing speak. It gives us the real data. So as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you to ponder this. How might this level of standardized mathematical transparency influence your own future decisions? Will it change where you choose to eat dinner, or maybe even where you invest your money? Thank you so much for joining me today to explore the real mechanics of supply chain sustainability.